Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at the life of Ramana Maharshi and, specifically his sudden awakening to self-realization.
Okay.
So, we're going to be looking at a biography of Ramana Maharshi and kind of trying to understand how this seemingly, ordinary schoolboy had this extraordinary experience, and more importantly, what we can all learn from it.
Yeah, it's so interesting, unlike a lot of spiritual journeys that unfold gradually over, years of practice and things like that, Ramana Maharshi's kind of shift in consciousness happened pretty much overnight.
Right.
He was just 16 years old, going about his normal life when he had this sudden intense fear of death.
Oh, wow. That's pretty unusual. Most teenagers aren't really thinking about, their own mortality, are they?
No, not at all. And, this wasn't some kind of gradual fear or, a philosophical pondering about death. This was like a visceral, immediate terror that gripped him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's described as...
I can imagine how unsettling that would be. What do you even do with that kind of fear, especially at that age?
Most of us would probably try to distract ourselves, push the fear away, seek reassurance from others,
Right.
But what Ramana Maharshi did, Venkataraman, as he was known then, was totally different. He actually decided to use this fear as like a catalyst for self-discovery.
So instead of running from it, he kind of leaned into it.
Absolutely. Yeah, he basically decided to treat it as a thought experiment. Asking himself, like, what if I'm dying right now? What does that actually mean? But he didn't just, think about it. He actually dramatized the experience of death.
What do you mean by dramatized?
Okay, so the biography describes how he actually lay down on the floor, held his breath, kept his lips tightly sealed, mimicking a corpse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he wanted to make the experience as real as possible, to fully confront his fear and explore kind of the depths of it.
So it's kind of like a method acting approach to spiritual inquiry.
Kind of, yeah.
That's interesting. But what did he discover through this kind of intense exercise?
Well, through this process of this intense, self-inquiry,
Yeah.
Venkataraman came to a huge realization.
Yeah.
His body might be dying, but he, the essence of his being was not.
Right.
And this sparked this fundamental shift in his consciousness. Like a permanent centering in the I,
Yeah.
the deathless self.
Okay, so he has this kind of existential crisis, faces his fear head on, and emerges with this, incredible realization of the self. But how do we understand this concept of the self? Because it all seems a bit abstract.
Yeah, you're right. The language can be tricky.
Yeah.
The self, as Ramana Maharshi experienced it, is distinct from kind of our everyday sense of, we typically identify with our thoughts, emotions, personality, and, all that stuff. But he's really pointing at something much deeper and more fundamental.
So there's a difference between the I that thinks it's me and then the true self.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so years later, the biography actually recounts this conversation between Ramana Maharshi and this Western seeker, Paul Brunton. And Brunton was really struggling with this concept of the self. He was asking, what exactly is this self? Is it like a second me inside of me?
I can relate to Brunton's confusion there. It's hard to wrap your head around this idea of a self that's separate from, our usual sense of identity.
Well, Ramana Maharshi explained that it's not about having two separate selves.
Right.
It's about recognizing that the I that we usually identify with, our thoughts, emotions, personality, all that, is not the true self.
Okay.
And he often referred to this as the ahamkara, the ego self.
Right.
Which is different from the true self, the pure awareness that underlies all experience.
So Amkar, the ego self, is kind of like this temporary mask we wear, and then the true self is this unchanging essence beneath it all.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay, so how do we get to that?
Well, he pointed to this very simple but very powerful way to access this true self. He said, focus on the I, thought.
You mean the thought that says, I am doing this or I am that?
Exactly. And he taught that if you kind of trace this I thought back to its source, you'll inevitably arrive at the true self, this pure awareness that's always present.
So it's like an inner investigation, peeling back the layers to find the source of that, I thought.
Exactly. And what's really cool is that finding the true self isn't about losing consciousness, or becoming some kind of emotionless zombie.
Right.
It's about gaining a higher consciousness,
an
awareness that's not bound by the limitations of the ego.
This concept of a higher consciousness is interesting. Can you elaborate on what that actually means?
It's a state of being that's free from, the usual anxieties and fears and attachments that we experience when we're caught up in that ego self. It's a state of, peace and clarity and just boundless love.
Okay.
Think of it like this. You haven't lost consciousness. You've just expanded it to encompass something much, vaster than your individual self.
Wow, that's quite a shift in perspective. But if this true self is always present, why don't we experience it all the time? What's blocking us from this realization?
That's a great question. And it gets to the heart of Ramana Maharshi's teachings. Essentially, we've become so engrossed in the world of thoughts, emotions, sensory experiences,
right?
That we lose touch with that underlying awareness, the true self.
Okay.
He likened it to, mistaking a rope for a snake in the dark.
Oh, so we're kind of scared of a rope because we're misperceiving it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We create all these anxieties and fears based on misinterpretations and illusions. And the key to dispelling these illusions, he taught, is to turn inwards, to inquire into the nature of our own being.
Okay, so this idea of self-inquiry is really resonating with me. But before we go into that, I kind of want to go back to the timeline of Ramana Maharshi's awakening.
Okay.
Because we've established that it was sudden and profound, but was it truly instantaneous?
Yeah.
Or was there a process involved, even if it was really quick?
Yeah, that's a really important point. And the biography actually clarifies that,
Okay.
While his awakening happened very quickly, it wasn't just, instant magic.
Right.
He actually described it as striving towards light, a focused effort, even if it unfolded really rapidly,
Okay.
So there was a process, even if it wasn't drawn out over years.
It's like anything worthwhile in life, it requires effort and dedication.
Absolutely.
So this striving towards light, this inner work, what did that look like for him during that time?
Well, following this experience of kind of dying,
Yeah.
Ramana Maharshi went through this drastic transformation.
Okay.
The biography describes this complete shift in his values and behavior. For instance, he developed this profound indifference to food. He would eat only what was given to him, without any preference for taste or variety.
It's interesting. It's almost like his senses became less important.
Exactly. His focus really shifted away from the external world and the pleasures of the body. And he also lost interest in socializing with his friends and family. He was really drawn to solitude and contemplative practices.
That's quite a change for a teenager. I can imagine his family, found this all pretty perplexing.
Yeah, they were understandably confused and concerned. His older brother, in a moment of teasing, actually suggested that he might as well, go live in the jungle like an ancient hermit.
Oh, the classic sibling humor.
Right.
But despite his family's, bewilderment, Ramana Maharshi felt this strong pull towards one particular place, the Meenakshi temple.
Yes, the temple really became his sanctuary.
Yeah.
The biography details how he would spend hours absorbed in deep contemplation, just completely oblivious to his surroundings.
It's fascinating how he was drawn to this traditional religious setting, even though his own awakening was so spontaneous and non-traditional.
Yeah, it speaks to that universal yearning for something beyond the everyday, that connection with something greater than ourselves, regardless of the form it takes.
Yeah.
And, in the temple, he actually experienced these really intense waves of emotion, often weeping uncontrollably.
Yeah. It sounds like a profound release, like a letting go of old patterns and conditioning as he kind of fully embraced this new awareness. But what happened after this period at the temple? Did he stay there?
Well, that's actually where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
Oh, okay.
We'll explore how this really intense period of inner transformation led him to make this, life-altering decision that would eventually lead him to become the renowned spiritual teacher we know today as Ramana Maharshi.
Wow, this is already so captivating. I'm really excited to hear what happened next. But before we move on, is there a particular insight from, this part of Ramana Maharshi's journey that stands out to you?
I think for me, it's the power of using challenges. Even, seemingly negative experiences like fear as this catalyst for self-discovery. Instead of suppressing or avoiding his fear of death,
right,
he really turned it into this tool for profound inner exploration.
Wow. That's a powerful message for all of us. It's a reminder that sometimes, leaning into our fears and anxieties can actually lead to our greatest breakthroughs. Welcome back, everyone. So before the break, we were discussing Ramana Maharshi's dramatic transformation after his experience of mentally dying at the age of 16. He'd become indifferent to food, withdrawn from social life, and really found solace in the Meenakshi temple. It seemed like he was on this totally different path than the one his family had envisioned for him.
Yeah, you're right. It definitely created quite a stir within his family, but amidst all the confusion and concern, there was this deeper yearning within Venkataraman, this pull towards a life dedicated to spiritual pursuit. And this yearning ultimately led him to make a decision that would really change the course of his life forever.
So what happened next? Did he confide in his family about his inner experiences?
Well, the biography suggests that he didn't actually attempt to explain his transformation in detail. And remember, he was still quite young, and perhaps he didn't yet have the words or the means to convey, the depth of what he'd experienced. So instead, he kind of acted on this strong inner impulse, this irresistible pull towards a sacred mountain called Arunachala.
Arunachala, that name has a certain mystical ring to it. Can you tell us more about this mountain and its significance?
So Arunachala is located in South India near the town of Tiruvannamalai, and it's revered as this powerful spiritual vortex. It's believed to be a manifestation of Shiva, the Hindu deity of destruction and transformation, and many saints and sages have been drawn to Arunachala throughout history, seeking enlightenment and spiritual liberation.
So this wasn't just some random mountain that he decided to climb. It was a place imbued with spiritual energy, a destination for seekers throughout the ages.
Exactly. And for Venkataraman, this wasn't simply a pilgrimage. It was a complete renunciation of his old life, a leap of faith into the unknown. And the biography recounts how he actually secretly left a note for his family, stating his intention to go to Arunachala and dedicate himself to his spiritual path.
Wow, that's a bold move, especially for someone so young. He essentially left everything behind, his family, his studies, his entire known world, all to follow this inner calling. And kind of reminds me of those classic hero's journey myths, where the protagonist sets off on this perilous adventure to fulfill their destiny.
Yeah, there's definitely a parallel there. And just like in those myths, this journey involved its own set of challenges. Venkataraman traveled for days, facing hunger, exhaustion, the uncertainties of traveling alone in a foreign land. But he persevered, driven by this unshakable conviction that he was on the right path.
It's incredible to think about the strength of his resolve. It speaks to the power of that inner calling, that sense of purpose that can really propel us forward, even in the face of adversity.
And when he finally arrived at Arunachala, something profound shifted within him. He entered the ancient Arunachalaswara temple dedicated to Shiva and immediately felt this sense of homecoming, a feeling of deep peace and belonging.
So he found his true home, both physically and spiritually. He left behind the life that no longer served him and stepped into this new reality, one aligned with his inner truth.
Exactly, and it's here at the foot of Arunachala that Venkataraman fully embraced his spiritual identity, shedding his old name and taking on the moniker Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi.
Ramana Maharshi, it feels like a name imbued with power and wisdom, a name that echoes through the halls of spiritual history. But, even though he had renounced the material world, it wasn't about escaping life, right?
Right. Ramana Maharshi's journey wasn't about retreating from the world, but about diving deeper into the truth of existence. He saw the world with all its beauty and suffering as a reflection of the divine.
So even though he was living a life of simplicity and solitude, he wasn't detached from the human experience.
Not at all. In fact, as his reputation as a sage grew, people from all walks of life flocked to Arunachala seeking his guidance. They were drawn to his radiant presence, his profound wisdom, and his simple yet powerful teachings.
That's what I'm really curious about. What were his teachings like? How did he guide others on their own spiritual journeys? Did he have specific methods or practices that he shared?
So Ramana Maharshi's teachings were both profound and accessible. He didn't establish a rigid system of beliefs or prescribe elaborate rituals.
Yeah.
His approach was really rooted in the power of self-inquiry. This direct path to realizing the true nature of the self.
This idea of self-inquiry keeps coming up. Can you elaborate on what that actually entails? What did he teach people to do?
At the heart of his teachings was this simple but profound question: who am I? And he encouraged people to turn their attention inwards, to inquire into the source of the animal. I thought, remember, he emphasized that difference between the ahamkara, the ego self, and the true self. The pure awareness that underlies all experience self-inquiry was really the path to disentangling oneself from the limitations of the ego and realizing this true self.
So it's not about coming up with an intellectual answer to the question, who am I? But rather it's an experiential process of uncovering the truth through direct observation.
Precisely. He wasn't interested in philosophical debates or intellectual gymnastics. He wanted people to experience the truth for themselves, to move beyond the realm of concepts and into the realm of direct knowing.
Okay, that makes sense. It's kind of like, those optical illusions where you have to shift your perspective to see the hidden image. It's not about adding more information, but about seeing what's already there in a new way.
That's a great analogy. And then, Ramana Maharshi offered a variety of approaches to facilitate this process of self-inquiry. One method he often recommended was to focus on the feeling of I am. the sense of pure being that's always present within us.
So instead of getting caught up in the content of our thoughts, we can simply observe the feeling of being, the sense of I am, that's always there regardless of what we're thinking or feeling.
Exactly. It's like tuning into the background hum of existence, the pure awareness that's always present beneath the surface fluctuations of the mind.
This is starting to sound like meditation. Did Ramana Maharshi teach specific meditation techniques?
He didn't prescribe a rigid set of techniques, but he did encourage practices that could help quiet the mind and cultivate a state of receptive awareness. He often recommended what he called vichara, which can be translated as inquiry or self-investigation.
So vichara is another word for this process of self-inquiry that we've been discussing.
Yes, it's essentially a practice of persistently turning our attention inwards, observing the thoughts and feelings that arise and tracing them back to their source. It's about becoming aware of the thinker rather than getting lost in the thoughts themselves.
This is fascinating, but I'm wondering how practical this is in everyday life. Can we really be expected to constantly analyze our thoughts and feelings while juggling work, family, and all the other demands of modern life?
That's a great question, and it's something that Ramana Maharshi addressed directly. He didn't advocate for withdrawing from the world or becoming a hermit. He believed that self-inquiry could be practiced anywhere at any time, even amidst the hustle and bustle of daily life.
So it's not about escaping the world, but about bringing this awareness into every aspect of our experience.
Precisely. He likened it to a drop of ink dissolving in a glass of water. The ink represents our individual consciousness, and the water represents the vast ocean of pure awareness through self-inquiry. We gradually dissolve the boundaries of our limited self and merge into the boundless expanse of the true self.
That's a beautiful image. It suggests that self-realization isn't about becoming something different, but about recognizing the interconnectedness of all things.
Yeah. And this realization, according to Ramana Maharshi, is the key to lasting peace and fulfillment. It's about freeing ourselves from the illusion of separateness and experiencing the unity that underlies all of existence.
This is all so incredibly inspiring, but before we get too carried away with the philosophical implications, I'm curious to hear more about Ramana Maharshi himself. What was he like as a person? How did he interact with the people who came seeking his guidance?
That's a wonderful question, and it leads us to a really fascinating aspect of Ramana Maharshi's life and teachings. While he was revered as this sage, he never claimed to be anything special. He saw himself as a simple guide, pointing the way to the truth that resides within everyone.
So he didn't put himself on a pedestal or present himself as some kind of enlightened guru?
Not at all. In fact, he often downplayed his own experiences and emphasized that the true self is the same in everyone. He didn't see himself as having achieved something that others couldn't also achieve. His teachings weren't about following him, but about discovering one's own inner truth.
That's truly remarkable. It speaks to a deep humility and a genuine desire to empower others on their own spiritual journeys. But how did he actually interact with people? What was it like to be in his presence?
Well, people who visited him described this palpable sense of peace and presence emanating from him. He radiated this quiet stillness and this unwavering clarity that just seemed to dissolve anxieties and doubts. He didn't offer elaborate discourses or preach from a pulpit. His teaching style was often conversational, responding to questions with simple yet profound insights.
So he was more of a guide than a guru, a wise friend offering gentle nudges in the direction of self-discovery.
Exactly. He met people where they were offering guidance and support without judgment or dogma. And his teachings were always grounded in practicality, emphasizing the application of these principles in everyday life.
Okay, that makes sense. It's one thing to talk about these lofty spiritual concepts, but it's quite another to actually integrate them into, the messiness and complexity of our daily lives.
And that's precisely where the true value of Ramana Maharshi's teachings lies. He offered this path to self-realization that wasn't about escaping the world, but about transforming our relationship to it. Yeah. He showed that peace and fulfillment aren't found in some distant future state, but are available right here, right now, if we can only learn to see with the eyes of the true self.
That's really powerful. This deep dive is already proving to be so insightful, but before we delve further into the practical application of these teachings, I'd love to hear more about the specific methods and practices that Ramana Maharshi used to cultivate this state of awareness. What were some of the tools he used to guide people on their journeys of self-discovery?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll explore in detail in the final part of our deep dive. We'll uncover the specific techniques and practices that he offered, as well as the profound impact they had on the lives of countless seekers who were fortunate enough to cross his path.
I'm so eager to hear more, but for now, we'll leave our listeners with a question to ponder. What is the key to unlocking your own potential to experiencing lasting peace and fulfillment? Lies not in seeking something outside yourself, but in turning inwards and exploring the depths of your own being.
It's a powerful question to contemplate. And with that, we'll take a short break and be back soon for the final part of our deep dive into the life and teachings of Ramana Maharshi.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the life and teachings of Ramana Maharshi. We've journeyed with him from his sudden awakening as a teenager, through his renunciation of worldly life and his arrival at the sacred mountain at Arunachala. And now I think it's time to really explore the heart of his teachings, discover the practical tools that he offered for self-discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. As we've been discussing, Ramana Maharshi's approach was really centered on self-inquiry, using that question, who am I?
Yeah.
As this tool to dismantle the illusion of the ego and reveal the true self. But he didn't just leave people with a question. He offers a variety of methods to actually guide this inquiry.
So how did these methods work? What were people supposed to do?
Well, one of the core practices that he recommended was called vichara, which is a Sanskrit term often translated as inquiry or self-investigation. And this involved persistently turning your attention inwards and observing the thoughts and feelings that arise, without judgment or attachment.
So it's not about trying to stop thoughts or suppress emotions, but really just about observing them with this kind of detached awareness.
Exactly. He emphasized that thoughts and feelings are like clouds passing through the sky of awareness. They come and go, but the sky itself remains unchanged. So by practicing vichara, we begin to identify less with these passing phenomena and connect more deeply with that underlying awareness, the true self.
That makes sense. It's about shifting our identification from the content of our minds to that kind of spacious awareness that holds it all. But how do we actually do that? It sounds kind of abstract.
Well, Ramana Maharshi offered several techniques to kind of support this practice of vichara, and one approach he often recommended was to focus on the feeling of I am, that sense of pure being that's always present within us.
So instead of getting caught up in the stories, our minds are telling us we can simply rest our attention on that feeling of existing, that sense of I am that's always there, regardless of what's happening around us.
Exactly. It's about becoming aware of the awareness itself. The backdrop of consciousness that precedes all thoughts, feelings, and sensations. He likened it to a screen upon which a movie is projected. The images on the screen change, but the screen itself remains constant.
That's a really helpful analogy. It makes this idea of focusing on the I am feel a lot more tangible. But did he recommend any other methods for kind of cultivating this awareness?
He also spoke about the importance of cultivating what he called self-attention, which is different from the self-consciousness that we often experience in social situations. This is a more subtle form of attention, like turning inwards toward the source of our being.
So instead of constantly, monitoring our appearance or worrying about what others think of us, we can direct that attention inwards towards that source of awareness itself.
Precisely. It's about cultivating this kind of gentle curiosity about our own inner experience. Noticing the thoughts, feelings, and sensations that arise without getting lost in them.
This all sounds very much like mindfulness, which is such a popular practice these days. Was Ramana Maharshi essentially teaching a form of mindfulness?
There are definitely parallels between his teachings and modern mindfulness practices. Both emphasize present moment awareness and a non-judgmental observation of our inner experience.
Right.
However, Ramana Maharshi's approach kind of went a step further, aiming not just for greater awareness, but for this fundamental shift in identification, from the ego self to the true self.
So while mindfulness can help us become more present and less reactive, Ramana Maharshi's teachings kind of offer this path to a deeper realization of our true nature, our interconnectedness with all of existence.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And this realization, according to Ramana Maharshi, is the key to lasting peace and fulfillment. It's about recognizing that our true essence is not limited to our individual thoughts, feelings, and experiences, but is part of something much vaster and more profound.
This is incredibly inspiring, but I'm wondering how accessible this kind of realization is, for the average person. Did Ramana Maharshi believe that everyone could achieve this state of self-realization?
He absolutely did. He emphasized that the true self is already present within everyone, just as the sun is always shining, even when it's hidden behind the clouds.
Okay.
The challenge lies in kind of clearing away the clouds of ignorance and illusion that obscure our perception.
So it's not about becoming something we're not, but about uncovering what's already there, removing the obstacles that prevent us from seeing our true nature.
Exactly. And he believed that anyone who's sincerely engaged in the practice of self-inquiry could experience this awakening, this shift in identification from that limited ego self to that boundless true self.
That's so encouraging to hear. It's like a beacon of hope in a world that often feels so chaotic and uncertain. It suggests that there's this path to lasting peace and fulfillment that's available to everyone, regardless of their background or circumstances.
And what's really remarkable is that Ramana Maharshi embodied these teachings in his own life. He didn't just talk about self-realization, he lived it. People who visited him described this palpable sense of peace and presence emanating from him. He radiated this quiet stillness and this unwavering clarity that just seemed to dissolve anxieties and doubts.
So he wasn't just a teacher, he was a living example of the transformative power of these practices.
Precisely, and his impact went far beyond his physical presence. His teachings continue to inspire millions of people around the world, offering this timeless path to self-discovery and spiritual liberation.
This deep dive has been such a profound journey. We've explored the life of this extraordinary individual who experienced the sudden awakening and dedicated his life to sharing the path to self-realization. As we wrap up, what are some key takeaways that our listeners can carry with them?
I think one of the most important takeaways is the power of self-inquiry. Ramana Maharshi's life and teachings really demonstrate that turning inwards, questioning our assumptions, and exploring the nature of our own being can lead to profound insights and transformative experiences.
And it's not just about, intellectual understanding, it's about embodying these insights in our daily lives, bringing awareness to our thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Exactly. And while the path of self-inquiry might seem challenging at times, Ramana Maharshi's story reminds us that the journey itself is a source of immense growth and fulfillment. It's about embracing that process of uncovering our true nature step by step, breath by breath.
This has left me feeling incredibly inspired, with the renewed sense of possibility and a deeper appreciation for the power of turning inwards. It's a reminder that we all have the potential to awaken to our true nature, to experience this really profound sense of peace and interconnectedness that's independent of our external circumstances.
Yeah, and as we conclude this exploration, I think we'll leave you with a final invitation. Embrace the practice of self-inquiry. Ask yourself, who am I? And see where that question leads you. You might be surprised by what you discover.
That's a powerful invitation to embark on our own journeys of self-discovery. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the life and teachings of Ramana Maharshi. Until next time, keep diving deep.
I hope you like this chapter. We need volunteers and sponsors to create content with even better quality and with more variety. If you wish to join this initiative as a volunteer or sponsor, please click the links given in description below. To help us reach more viewers, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Biography Central. Thank you for your time. It means a lot. Namaste.